Hi, I'm Chris McCoy, and welcome to the Memphis Flyer podcast. And look, we've got guests.
Hey, I'm Alex Greene, also with the Memphis Flyer, and here to talk about this week's cover story with
John Doyle, the executive director of the Memphis Rock and Soul Museum and the Memphis Music Hall of Fame.
Well, as always, we want to talk about what's in the paper this week, and this is our cover story.
That's awesome.
Over here, and we're also there's also in the paper this week. We've got Jackson Baker talking about the latest on the efforts by the Republicans in the House, the State House, to oust Steve Mulroy, and we've got the usual Michael Donahue. Michael Donahue wrote the music feature this week, didn't
he did about a band called the Narrows.
Yeah,
a young band. It seems to be centered on some Rhodes students, and I think they have kind of a '60s, '70s kind of sound.
Well, wow, I was in a band at Rhodes that had a '60s, '70s kind of sound too. What a coincidence! It was the '80s, but and '90s too.
It's a crucible for that kind of sound.
Absolutely, absolutely. But and then I wrote about common side effects on Adult Swim, which I think might just be the best show on TV. It's the finale is this weekend. It airs on Sunday night, and it is a animated. It's like a thriller almost. I mean, it's comedy. You would expect for like animated Adult Swim, it's going to be comedy, right? And there is comedic aspects, but it's really more like an X-Files type thriller, and it's all about the it's really talked about the sort of the pharmaceutical industrial complex and how broken healthcare is in America, and it's just like what the lengths that it drives people to, But it's a great show. Highly recommend it. Should start from the beginning. This is not one of those jump into the finale kind of things because you're not going to understand what's going on. You got to jump into the beginning, but it's on Max. You can check it out. But I'm going to stop wasting our friend John's time here, and we're going to talk about the cover story. Alex, tell them about the cover story.
Well, this is something I've been wanting to write a while because it's been a year now since the Memphis Rock and Soul Museum purchased, with the help of many benefactors, the old Lansky's building.
Yeah.
And that's on 2nd Street and Beale. And it also includes where the Hard Rock Cafe once stood.
Right.
So this is huge in terms of the museum ecosystem in Memphis. So,
cool.
John, I thought it'd be great if you could tell us how that came about. How Lansky's is such an institution in music history, fashion history, Beale Street history.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Yeah, it's a complicated story that I'll try to not make complicated. But Rock and Soul's 25 years old this year and was put together by the Smithsonian Institution, the only museum on the planet that's not a Smithsonian museum that the Smithsonian put the whole exhibit together. So tons of Memphians have never been there. I encourage them to go. It builds a real sense of pride of your city and everything. So obviously we're a nonprofit. You have a board of directors, and the board of directors, during a strategic planning session a couple of years ago, someone threw out the idea, what if we took our two museums, the Memphis Rock and Soul Museum that's at FedEx Forum, and the Memphis Music Hall of Fame, a smaller museum that's in that building, and in typical Memphis style, we talk about things that it was the former Hard Rock building or the former Lansky's building or the former EPE building, the same way we talk about Cecil's used to be the Kroger, the former Cecil's, and everything, the way we do things here in Memphis. But one board member threw out the idea of, wouldn't it be great for long-term planning if we took both museums, put it under one roof with more space for programming for students, programming for musicians, and really expand our mission beyond just, as a old museum executive director talks about, dead things in glass cases. Museums are supposed to be active and involved in the community and telling great stories the way both Rock and Soul and Hall of Fame do. But they mentioned, what if we got a building and we had all of this under one roof? And everyone thought they were crazy. We had an incredible deal. Hard Rock Cafe was our landlord, and so we were there lease free, which is incredible as a nonprofit organization. And then, thanks to the Memphis Grizzlies, we've been at FedEx Forum for 21 years, and they've been our landlord lease free. So I've been a pampered executive director, never writing a check for lease, and having both Hard Rock and the Grizzlies extremely taking care of us. Obviously, FedEx Forum is about to go through some major renovations. Our 25-year lease ends in 2029, and so about a month after that strategic planning session, Hal Lansky of Lansky Brothers came through the front door and said, "I've got some bad news. Hard Rock's leaving town." As our landlord for the Hall of Fame Museum, I asked what that meant, and he told us that we were going to sell the building. When this came up at a strategic planning session, I cautioned the board, as a music museum in Memphis, Tennessee, you don't want to be any further than a half block off of Beale Street. It's the center of entertainment district. More importantly, it's the center of world music. That's the epicenter of where black and white musicians came together, and the whole explosion of rock and roll that made Memphis world famous took place. And so, you start talking about the area a little further south by Wiseacre and different places where we could look if we went towards that. All of a sudden, this fell in our hands. Not to be expected, but I guess we were destined to be in a historic music museum. You envy folks like Sun Studios and Graceland and even Stax Museum, not the original building, but on sacred ground from a musical standpoint. And there couldn't have been a better building. And this came around, had a $5 million price tag. Our board chair, J.W. Gibson, and his wife, Kathy, stepped up with the first $1 million donation to that. Mike Curb with Curb Records out of Nashville, who y'all have written about in the Flyer and in Memphis Magazine before, came in at $2.5 million. The Assisi Foundation of Greater Memphis came in with $1 million. So within 6 to 8 months, we raised the $5 million and purchased this incredible building. The size is perfect. It'll be great for a performance space that we can do, not just do performances to make money as a nonprofit, but we really want to. We've been limited as far as space over at FedEx Forum, and so we really want to expand what we're doing for the community, making the facility available to other nonprofits like Memphis Music Initiative, Music Export Memphis, and others, performances from other nonprofits like Angel Street, Stax Music Academy, really, and in addition to doing some great concerts there, some great workshops for musicians, some great summer camps for students. And so it's the perfect building for it, historic as it can be, in a weird coincidence, considering the fact that Elvis used to buy his clothes there from Bernard Lansky's. Priscilla Presley came on board with us so in favor of this project for Beale Street, recognizing she has a strong heart for what Beale Street was and can still be growing from a music standpoint, but also has such a rich history that makes the city great. We're doing great music like the band that you were talking about, but they're standing on the shoulders of all these legends and stuff. And so we want to expound on that with our new building there on Beale Street, really let folks know that some great things happen. Beale Street's a great place, but so much happened more than just buying an alcoholic beverage and a paint bucket. You can learn about Ida B. Wells, the American Negro Baseball League, so much other stuff. So we're excited to be part of Beale Street and growing.
One thing, and I'm glad you mentioned Ida B. Wells and that aspect of it, because you mentioned this in our interview, and there wasn't really space to explore it in the story, but the Memphis Rock and Soul Museum is, in a sense, a de facto civil rights museum, as you pointed out.
Absolutely. The Smithsonian, when I first started working with them when I came on board in 2003, they said that they considered this great exhibit that they put together, and it was part of their 150th anniversary. They did 95% of what the Smithsonian owns is in storage, and despite their 12 museums on the right there on the mall of DC, and so they really felt a need to, as America's attic, as they call themselves, more of these incredible pieces of artifacts and memorabilia to be out where the public can see them. So they did a major exhibit that toured the United States with some of their key components: the ruby slippers from The Wizard of Oz, Abraham Lincoln stovetop hat, and they developed the bones of this exhibit that really tells about how America's true genres of music, primarily rock and soul music, came together, and how so many of us, and this is true for Memphis, so many of us, just because we have Big Elvis Week that happens in August, we think that that's where the spark happened. This young white teenager walked into Sun Studios, the birth of rock and roll, and that's it. And they wanted to tell so much more, which is what makes rock and soul exciting. We embrace everything that Elvis did, everything that Sam Phillips did. But yeah, they said they consider it as much a civil rights museum as it is a music museum, because of an incredible story where young white teenagers were introduced to black music, and that totally changed music. When I talk to students now, we're accustomed to trends in music, the grunge trend that came out of Seattle, boy bands, disco, those kinds of things. But this was such a different thing, where you were dealing with crooner music, Frank Sinatra, Perry Como. That's what folks were listening to, unless they were listening to Grand Ole Opry country from Nashville. And then all of a sudden, this merging of black and white music, unfortunately, to isolating the black musicians that influenced the young white musicians. We talk frequently, because we think it's part of our mission, that, yeah, we want Elvis elevated for the role he played, Ike Turner for the role he played as far as the birth of rock and roll, obviously Sam Phillips. But there's these legions of black musicians who never got credit, never got royalties, obviously never got Grammy Awards or anything like that, that are less spoken of. And so Rock and Soul highlights that with additional space at 126 Beale. We want to focus on that more and come even more current with the rock and soul story, because Smithsonian talked about the heyday and developing it, but we feel like that story continues. Where our Memphis in the 1970s and 80s, as you mentioned, coming from Rhodes College, was that continuation of our heydays. There's great things that happen, but there's so much great that's happening now. And so we feel a role kind of telling that complete Memphis music story, that we want to come forward with that, with things that are happening both in our exhibits and in our programming.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I think one great thing about this, as members of your board pointed out when you made the purchase, was that it'll bring the Rock and Soul Museum and the Memphis Music Hall of Fame under one roof.
Yeah.
And I just revisited the Hall of Fame in preparation for this story, and it really struck me what great exhibits that little museum has as well. Right. And it will make perfect sense to fold those in together, because the Hall of Fame really does bring it up to date more so. You see exhibits dedicated to 3-6 Mafia.
Right.
And tributes to Big Star, and they're mentioned in the Rock and Soul Museum, but that's even more emphasized in the Hall of Fame. And I think that's going to bring it a critical mass to bring everything up to date and emphasize that it's an ongoing process.
That's right. We talk about Rock and Soul tells the history of Memphis music, and Hall of Fame celebrates the heroes of Memphis music. And going back to another strategic planning session, when Kevin Kane from Memphis Tourism threw out the idea of we should start the Memphis Music Hall of Fame, and operating Rock and Soul at the time, I was like, real quick, wait, what does this mean? Is this a chicken dinner? Are there trophies? Is it another museum? And it started out as a tribute. And then after our first tribute concert at the Cannon Center, then Mayor A.C. Wharton asked about a brick and mortar museum and where we were going to put the brick and mortar Memphis Music Hall of Fame. And we didn't have plans for that initially. He encouraged us to do so because it was part of that Hard Rock Cafe moving from right to the side of where Tin Roof is now to that 126 Beale, and they wanted a music museum as a part of it. It's a smaller space. We had to do more as far as interactivity, which works well because as you're celebrating these people, you can use video clips and interviews of them. But yeah, Alex, it's right. It's I work with nominating committees each year as far as who gets inducted. Our next induction ceremony will be September 19th. And fortunately, all those folks, you gravitate towards the folks that Memphians name, B.B. King and Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash and Jerry Lee Lewis. But you can dive so much deeper. And so I'm equally proud of the Memphis Music Hall of Fame because it also credits musicians that don't get mentioned every time that someone talks about Memphis music.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes genre, just like you're talking about. Yeah, in rap and hip hop genre, Carlos Brody, this past year, Jazzy Faye, who's now in Atlanta, James Alexander's son, was inducted. But then also you go vaudeville with K-Star, you go contemporary gospel with Cassietta George. This past year, we inducted Rhodes Chalmers Rhodes. When the nominating committee brought them up, I had no earthly idea who they were. And they said they sang backup to all of the Al Green hits and most all of the hits at High Records. That was amazing to me because I'm not a musician, and so it's been an education experience. I went to Rhodes also, but my education has continued through rock and soul by learning all of this incredible stuff. And so they talked about Rhodes Chalmers Rhodes. I assumed they were black musicians, being the backup singers for Don Bryant and Al Green, etc. 3 white folks, 2 sisters. Charlie Chalmers was a saxophone player, and then was working with Willie Mitchell, and the whole thing came together. And the Rhodes sisters, who came out of rockabilly and bluegrass and stuff like that, with the Slim Rhodes and Dusty Rhodes and some of those that used to be seen on WMC TV way decades ago. And these sisters had been recording, the 3 of them came together, and so it's exciting. All of a sudden, then you add background singers to the Memphis Music Hall of Fame, and so many other individuals talked about. Erwin Salke is inducted because of the work he did as an attorney for musicians and stuff. And so again, obviously, I love to sell a ticket, so anybody can come to the Memphis Music Hall of Fame Museum. But our website, the MemphisMusicHallOfFame.com website, has comprehensive tribute pages with all 100 soon to be 106 of all of our inductees. The last year's inductees tribute pages are being put together. So you've got like 97 tribute pages of all these legendary musicians that people all over the planet are using for a research project to learn more about music, to learn more about Memphis. And it's exciting to get to know these folks that we take Memphis for granted. We know St. Jude is here, we know FedEx is here, and so, but we pretty much take it for granted that any country that you go to, they're going to know Memphis. We're like the 29th largest city in the United States. I can't name the 29th largest city of any other country on the planet. I don't know the 29th largest city of England or France, much less would I know anything about that city if I did know that city. But you go anywhere and you mention Memphis, and they're going to mention music, or they're going to mention Elvis.
Yeah, and I think that all those artists and people who contributed to music history in the Hall of Fame and in the museum, it really underscores the fact that this is the only museum for all of Memphis music.
That's right.
We have these wonderful places dedicated to specific points, the Sun Studio, or the Stax Museum of American Soul Music, or Graceland. But this embraces them all and more.
Yeah, and those are all iconic, and we kind of lived for a couple of decades in envy of really sitting on hallowed ground from a music standpoint. Graceland,
because they sat on hallowed
absolutely
ground.
I mean, 600,000 people a year go through Graceland. This many years after Elvis's death. I mean, is it been 40 years since Elvis's death? Sun Studios, 160,000 a year go through that museum because, and it's small, it's like this big, but you're standing in, instead of this microphone, you're standing in front of a microphone that Johnny Cash or whoever, or Joe Hill Lewis or whoever sang on. And so they're sacred kind of things. The great thing that I found when I came from, formerly worked at the Memphis in May Festival and then came here to Rock and Soul, the collaboration between music entities is incredible. You see that just when you see bands performing, and then you hear stories about members of the Rolling Stones or Aerosmith that hate each other, but they come together as a band. These music entities in Memphis truly collaborate with each other. I'm not competing with the Stax Museum of American Soul Music. We have a combo ticket that we sell with them. We encourage anybody who comes through our front door to go there, to go to the Blues Hall of Fame, obviously to go to Sun. In other places, Withers Gallery, which has a rich music history through Ernest Withers Photography. And so everybody recognizes that we're all in this thing together of lifting Memphis and work well doing it. And so it kind of goes back to that music thing of all genres, all musicians, really coming together.
And also, I think a great thing about the Hall of Fame, especially, is this ongoing ceremony, the induction ceremony you have every year. And those in themselves can be so compelling. I remember when Booker T. Jones was inducted, and it was this magical Memphis moment where he was inducted by Deanie Parker, who of course was the press agent at Stax and knew him so well. And as she came on stage, they brought out a big comfy easy chair. So like right out of someone's living room, she sat down and read a personal letter to Booker T. Jones that she had written just for the occasion. And it was this, you could see them looking at each other. He was in the audience waiting to go on stage and accept the award. She was reminiscing through this letter about all the magic that Stax embodied and the kind of refuge it was as the whole world was going crazy around them. And she was just, I don't know, half the Cannon Center was in tears.
Absolutely.
And you couldn't imagine that just happening spontaneously. This was encouraged and made possible by this induction ceremony.
Yeah, and that early beginnings of that induction ceremony and what's it going to be and what's the trophy going to look like, and I'm real obsessive about that. Someone said, maybe we just put plaques on a wall, and I'm like, no, this is Memphis music. And that's what I wish we as a community would elevate, that we would get over talking negative things about our city. I mean, this city, more than any other city, totally changed the planet. When you talk about music and the Smithsonian, there's a great quote from the Smithsonian. One of the curators talked to me and he said, the Smithsonian maintains that English is the primary language of business around the planet because of the music that came out of Memphis, Tennessee. Because non-English speaking countries learned English by singing the lyrics that came out of Stax Records, High Records, Sun Records. And so therefore they learn the English language. That's a heavy weight to carry. I don't know if that's totally true, but
especially given how we speak the language around here.
That's exactly right. I think they would at least have a Southern drawl if that's the way everybody learned it. But you're right. And as that ceremony was coming together, and I thought, okay, how do we get Memphians to want to come and buy a $30 ticket to go and see a concert of, unless Beyonce's coming to FedEx Forum or Springsteen's coming to FedEx Forum, oftentimes Memphians, we skip out. We don't support local musicians the way that we should, despite it being the backbone, despite the fact that our streets are paved in music. Why are we not supporting Memphis music? And, that's happening. So I thought, how do I pull together an induction ceremony that anybody wants to come to, especially since we did it 40 years late. We couldn't hand a trophy to Elvis or to Isaac Hayes or to, fortunately, it was, speaking of those weird moments, the first one we did, Bobby Blue Bland was inducted. He performed. It wasn't expected that he was going to perform, but he decided at the last minute that he wanted to perform, and it was a magical thing. And 12 months later, he's gone. And so that happens time and time again. And you think about if we as a city had started this in the 60s, then these folks truly, because I thought, the ones who are still, Booker T. Jones, living in Los Angeles, still with a strong career. How am I going to convince Booker T. Jones to come here for a concert? They come running, and they talk about how this means more than any award they've ever gotten before because it's their hometown honoring them. And then what surprised me even more were the other people that came running to pay tribute to them. I mean, as someone that doesn't have a background in booking musicians, I was able to get Keith Richards to come.
Who did he induct?
Keith Richards did Scotty Moore. Obviously, Jimmy Fallon came when Timberlake was inducted. Snoop Dogg came when William Bell was inducted. Neil Young came this past year when Spooner Oldham was inducted. Another weird thing that came together, Spooner Oldham, who's quite up in years, was coming. It just happened to work out for his schedule. He was performing at Farm Aid the weekend before with Neil Young, and so Neil Young said, I'd like to come and hand the trophy to, Spooner Oldham. And so, Peter Frampton has been there, Robert Plant has been there, and, fortunately it's helped me keep my job, but there's really not much magic to this. When you induct legendary Memphis musicians, there are hordes of people that line up to pay tribute to these folks, that revere these folks. And so I wish Memphians would, by the hordes, would line up to see these interactions and to realize that the folks, and it goes to our education program. We deal with junior high students who have no earthly idea who Booker T. Jones is or who the Bar-Kays are or who Otis Redding is or any of these things. But so many times these folks emerge right from their neighborhoods. I mean, David Porter, who sacked groceries across the street from Stax Records, and walked across the street and got a job there and became one of, if not the greatest songwriter of all times. And so we can impart into students, whether you want to be a politician or a sports legend or a musician or whatever it is, that there's something about the dirt of Memphis, Tennessee that legends emerge from.
One last question, John. You're talking about donations. Can just everyday folks donate to the museum?
Absolutely.
How do you recommend that?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, they can call me. They can go to our website. I mean, we're easy to find. So call, make a donation. We're going to memorialize these folks in this incredible building some way or another. We're going to do cool things with names of people that give. And so, there could be someone out there that has $1 million to give, but there might be someone out there who wants to be part of elevating music, elevating our entertainment district, embracing what Mayor Young's doing as far as now having a cultural office and surveying music and how do we grow music, and wants to send in a check for $100. We will. We're going to embrace all these folks through admissions to the museum, admissions to the Hall of Fame induction ceremony, depending on how many zeros are on the check. Put your name permanently into the building, which we're going to brand as the center of Memphis music. Not just, location is part of it. But yeah, it is also the center of Memphis music by that corner, that legendary corner that it's sitting on, where young white teenagers and great blues musicians kind of came together. It is truly the center of Memphis music. So yeah, we would be very appreciative of it. But just talking about it, just talking about what we're doing, what the other music attractions are doing, helps. If you, tight on your finances, which I certainly understand, but if you want to make a donation and be a part of this, give us a call. Give me a call. I will come and have coffee with you at the arcade and we'll exchange.
All right. Thanks.
Well, John, thank you so much for being
Thank
on
you, Chris.
today.
Appreciate it.
Great job on the cover story, Alex.
I appreciate it.
You can learn about all this and more in this week's Memphis Flyer. You can pick up a physical copy. I don't know about you, but I love the physical copy.
I like
of
a
the
physical
flyer.
copy.
Yeah, and
That means we're old, but that's okay.
yeah. Well, maybe you can spend 10 minutes not staring at a screen. I don't know. Just give it a shot. See how it makes you feel. But this is the Memphis Flyer podcast, and we will see you next week.